Welcome everybody to another essential conversation here at Wellbeings, and we're joined by, a man who impresses me very deeply by his humbleness, by his wisdom, and his sort of the way he's walked his life. Welcome, Wayne. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. So today, everyone, we're gonna talk about a very interesting topic. We're going to talk about, sort of like feedback, influence, and intimacy. And for you, some of those words you may recognize, for others you may not. But we're going to explore all of this and what it means to be able to communicate in a way where we move towards people in meaningful ways, where we move towards people and have connection and can possibly, help us avoid conflict after conflict. So Wayne is a transactional analyst. He's based in, I suppose, in the US, in Los Angeles. Wayne, isn't that correct?
Actually, it's in San Diego, south of Los Angeles.
That shows you I'm just displaying an imperfect host right now who didn't know that. And we welcome that. There's no perfection here. So yeah, that's cool. So Wayne's based in that part of the world, and he's had 50 years of experience applying transactional analysis in different settings. For 20 years of those, he practiced as a psychologist, a marriage counselor, and a coach. Before that, he used TA as a secondary school teacher. Additionally, I'm just thinking, when I grew up as a child, I haven't had a lot of really good teacher experiences, and I'm just thinking, like, wow, what would it be like to have a teacher who was trained in that level of connection? It's lucky pupils back in the day. That's all I say. So then Wayne also spent time in being in three senior leadership sort of positions in three organizations, where he had management roles in the Center of Creative Leadership and served as a board member on the Community Health Center and a sustainable energy organization. He also runs fantastic coaching groups. But what I want to say is that the reason why I got drawn to Wayne was there was something that he saw in he was touching a part of TA, transactional analysis, and he was bringing it into everyday life that I find really, really interesting. And I think we all can avail of new ways to be in the world and new ways to communicate. So if you're running around listening to this podcast, put on the kettle, put the feet up, and even if you're, and take a moment to digest what's been spoken here and to feel what's been spoken and to really ask yourself, what's impacting you from the share today. And then if there's any questions you have, if there's any queries you have, please message in the comments or reach out to any of Wayne's sort of contact details underneath. So without any further ado, Wayne, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And so, Wayne, how did this all happen? How did you get on this journey of entering into a world of accompanying people in the ways that you did? Like, what moved you to want to enter into this industry of you were a teacher initially. What was the spark that had you propelled you onto this journey, I suppose?
It was fear.
That's a good one.
my wife at the time was unhappy in our marriage, and she had been seeing a marriage counselor who specialized in transactional analysis. And basically, she told me that if I didn't get involved in counseling with that person, that she would leave. So I did. I got into the counseling, and in that process, I discovered transactional analysis, and I was so taken up with it for two reasons. One is that I was aware of the experiences I was having that she objected to. I was aware of what I was going through, sort of, but I didn't have any context to put it into. I didn't have any way of analyzing it or categorizing it as something else, and so it just seemed like something wrong with me. And TA gives us a structure, a model that enables us to categorize what we do in terms of its origin and what's happening, how it functions. So both things: where does it come from, and what is it like, and how is it impacting others? And the second thing was that there were a lot of people in this group, and we would get together before the group for coffee and after the group for wine or something, and we could talk to each other in this common language. And I became really excited about the opportunity to have a tool to understand myself better and understand other people better. And after I finished my master's degree in educational administration, I kind of looked around at the world I was in, and I decided I don't think I'd really be happy here a long time. And this interest in TA drove me to get my license as a marriage counselor and then a psychologist. And during the 1970s, until the early 80s, I had a really robust TA training program where I trained people to use TA in clinical and business settings. And it has served me well ever since.
Who stands out in your history as pivotal teachers in the industry, Wayne, that were beacons that brought you on the solid ground with TA? Who were the memorable influences on that teaching or learning journey of your own?
Well, first of all, I'd have to mention Bill Collins, not a well-known name in the TA community, although old-timers remember him. He was my primary trainer or supervisor. And in addition to being a great model for how to lead groups, how to structure and lead a marathon, explaining the theory in deeper detail, he also knew how to have fun in life. And I realized maybe more clearly now than ever before that part of what attracted me to him is that he was a model for having fun. And while you're doing something of value, you can also have fun doing it. And that was really valuable for me at that point in time. Another individual would be Bob Goulding. I had an experience. Well, I had several experiences with him, but one of the training retreats up in Mount Madonna back in about, I'm going to guess it was around 76 or so. He led me through what we call a redecision work, where you expose to your own awareness a false belief that you've held and a decision that you were following, an interpretation, and on the spot you change it. It's an involved process. You have to be in touch with your emotions, and it takes a good, safe structure to do it. But anyway, the point is, ever since then, the sense of my life has been different. It put me on a different path that was so beneficial. So I would mention him. Steve Cartman, attending workshops and things that he did have made such a difference. And then lots of the people who became well known during the 70s, I hadn't that chance to attend a workshop with them or some other training, and quite a list of those folks. But those are the main ones that come to mind.
You have a sort of a sense of nostalgia for, it's like I read all the books about the Geraldines, for example, and from a cathexis school through to the redecision school, and there's such a sort of like a, I get a feel of what that era was like when there was such a sort of growth spurt in different directions around transactional analysis and the great minds that were there at that time. creating these new directions coming from the heart of Burns' work. Really, really, it's like, yeah, I wish I was there at that time to experience that, to drink from that well of nourishment. And well, but I'm so happy that I'm drinking from this well of nourishment right now, Wayne. And and I'm curious about, what did you see in those early marathons or those early group experiences that was needed then in the world for people who were struggling? And what do you see? Is it the same now, or is it something different that you're seeing that is needed in the world today, in relation to relationship or communication or connection or trauma or depression? Like, what was it that were occurring a lot back then? Is it the same now, or is it shifted?
Well, of course, world conditions vary. And I think when world conditions vary, it can put greater stress or reduce stress on people, and therefore increase or decrease the relative importance of being able to understand and get along with yourself and understand and get along with others. And so, in that regard, like so many transactional analysis practitioners, my focus was always on helping people to be in a life position of being okay with themselves and okay with others. Now, that I'm okay, you're okay, it doesn't mean everything a person does is okay. It's not about their behavior. It's about their essence. That we realize that human beings have an inherent essence of being human. And I think it's reasonable to interpret that as something valuable and precious. And that circumstances, learning that we go through along the way, helps us develop habits of behavior that are favorable to society, and maybe some kinds of behaviors that are more toxic to society. And so transactional analysis was such a wonderful tool for helping people recognize the behaviors that weren't working well for them, or the attitudes toward others, and being able to practice and change those without devaluing them. When I was doing psychotherapy back in the 1970s and the 80s, we were still working through that pretty strong notion that there was something wrong with you if you needed therapy. And we didn't have anything between nothing and therapy. It was in the 80s, probably toward the end of the 80s, that the notion of coaching began to spring up as an alternative to psychotherapy and counseling. And I'm really grateful for that, because I became more and more interested in that. While I was with the center, one of my management roles was managing the executive coaches that work with the center, which are really talented people that really know psychology and organizational life, and they know coaching skills. And I found in that I could reach so much wider audience to help people who were functioning in life, were successful in life, or were struggling in life, but they had their head on pretty straight. And I could give them a little coaching, a little bit of information about TA to structure what was going on, and reduce their stress, give them more satisfying outcomes. In fact, to the point that when I retired from the center in 2018, and after recovering from working for a lot of years and kind of wanting to figure out what I wanted to do with myself now, I decided to go back into being a TA practitioner and trainer, but to focus on folks who didn't have clinical needs. They didn't have mental disorders, to focus on them, to focus instead on folks who make up 80% of the population, and reach out to them. Partly because, to be honest with you, we have a lot of really excellent transactional analysis therapists out there for people who have mental disorders. And then also because I just enjoyed working in that realm more. I enjoyed working as a coach more than therapy. And I thought, well, I'll just focus my efforts there. And hopefully folks in your audience can identify with that.
Yeah, and just for the audience, Wayne, you're kind of clarifying it there, but what's the difference between therapy and coaching? And I'm sure at some stage there's an intersection in there as well, you know?
Well, that's a challenging question because when I think back on I went through a lot of coaching training with schools like that, and they talk like it was different. But then when I would watch them train and supervise each other, the behavior wasn't all that different than what a therapist does. So first and foremost, I would say the difference is who you work with. That therapy is really for people who have either a really upsetting condition that they're facing in their life, or a mental disorder, or a personality disorder. And so when a person tries to help someone with that, I really think they need to have excellent skills and depth in that particular condition, whatever that condition. Maybe it's severe trauma, maybe it's like I said, a personality disorder, or marked depression, or marked anxiety. So, for instance, if you're coaching somebody who's blue, you might be able to do a great job with that. But if the person is more depressed than really greatly blue, you ought to know something about medications. You ought to have a psychiatrist that you're connected with, and those are valuable things. They're essential that we have those in our community. But it has to do. The big difference doesn't have to do with how you're talking to them so much as knowing what you're dealing with and having the skills and the knowledge to handle that. Beyond that, I'm sure that a lot of practitioners might be listening to thinking then, well, I do this and I do it because it's not that, and therefore I'm this, that kind of a thing. And because everybody has their specialty, if you will, the stuff that they like doing. But when you wipe all that stuff away, it was more about who you worked with than what you were doing.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think even people who, that I've experienced working with and also have been involved with may start off needing therapy and then do coaching. Like it's on a continuum of what their needs are as they go through their own journey in life. Or some start off with coaching and then find a part and then explore that more therapeutically. And yeah, I like the frame of how you put that. And then the therapist's own individual sort of life experience and orientation. So what the therapist has lived, what they've lived through, or what they're passionate about also is important to look at. If it matches the sort of client's struggles or traumas or whatever. But what I would love to get to, Wayne, is something that was making and I was thinking about this podcast, and I thinking what feels to be a really important part that I want to cover, and that's about communication, Wayne. And what I mean by communication is like, when I think about my own life, I think about my childhood, I think about school, I think about friends, I think about sort of different groups and sports I was involved in, and jobs later on in my life, and how important communication is, and how at times I didn't have the best models for communication. And I failed at it so many times, and still working on it. How to, I suppose, and what do I mean by that? Like how to communicate in a way where I'm in an adult position, and when I need to be in an adult position, when and when I can be in the heart and be affectionate and compassionate and empathetic, to be able to be there when it's required, and to be able to make decisions when it's required, and to get the timing right, and to know and then deal with my own triggers internally when they arise. And so the question, I suppose, Wayne, is how can we communicate better? I know it's a big question, and it's going to help us lead on to the heart of the topic today. But yeah, I suppose maybe let's ask a question before that. Where did you start to realize the importance of communication in your work? And then, and then maybe we can share a little bit more about how this podcast is going to talk about how to do it better in a way.
Well, I discovered it as a high school teacher, for one thing, when I realized that I had difficulty reaching the people that I was there to serve. And I had to learn how to create some kind of common ground to build upon with them. And then when I began learning about transactional analysis, I began being able to understand what state they were in and to be able to kind of complement or resonate with that state and ease them into a state where they might be more receptive to whatever guidance I had to give. I guess in a way, what I would say about it is that probably the biggest problem with communication might be, at a very high level, the belief that one person should win. And so a lot of communication is competitive in that way. And instead of two people coming out of it feeling understood and maybe not knowing what to do about the problem, but at least feeling like they didn't have to fight to reach a solution, like maybe they could get there by cooperation. And so, to what you were saying about bad models and stuff, or not optimal models, if we're trying to preserve our feeling of being okay by making somebody else feel not okay, that's a kind of communication, but it's certainly not going to lead toward better outcomes for all people concerned. It's not going to lead to I'm okay, you're okay feelings on both parties' part. So the one way to get to fixing those kinds of problems is transactional analysis, because, as I said earlier, it teaches us to be aware of what we're experiencing at the moment. And once we begin to recognize the experiences that lead us to be bad at communication, to be competitive about communication, or avoidant of communication, or overly solicitous in communication. In other words, once we begin to realize and recognize how we feel and the thoughts we have when we're in those states of mind, those patterns of behavior that lead to less than optimal communication, then we have the choice of being able to say, okay, I'm going to change that. I'm going to do something different. But if we just act automatically, we repeat old patterns.
You bring me back to a memory, Wayne, of when I was younger and I was brought up in Northern Ireland, which was a war zone at that time, and the humor was to take you down. It wasn't to lift you up. It would be like at somebody else's expense, and then that would be sort of in the sort of friends groups. That would be like you'd be celebrated for feeling okay by making somebody else feel not okay. Yeah. And it was painful, but people find humor out of that. And of course, that is also something to do with the context of, masking the sort of duress or the anxiety that we were all feeling at that time as young men.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember another time in my life when I was doing, like when I was first started off as a psychotherapist, and my therapist supervisor said to me one time, Nigel, well, let's think about every time you talk to your clients that what happens if you weren't going to impress them. So I realized that if I stopped trying to impress my clients, I didn't have very much to say. I would be sitting there and there'd be long spaces of silence. So it was a wonderful tool. And then I was able to deeply listen because I wasn't needing to be more than to be, like I have to be more in my, and grandiose or all knowing, or all wise, for the client to receive me. So I learned that way in that communication, stop trying to be more for me to be okay. And it was powerful because there was long periods where I was catching, oh, I'm trying to impress, or oh, I'm trying to let them know my knowledge, and it was really profound. It was really great because then long periods of time with clients would be me being with them, not me trying to impress them. And so,
And
as you were,
I think you hit a nail on the head when you said that you were doing that to try to be okay, or to feel okay about yourself, or to look okay to others, right? And that goes back to the kind of humor you were talking about. I think the laughter people have at someone else's expense is partly the relief of tension, that for a moment in time, they feel superior, they feel okay, or at least they don't feel less than the other person. And to me, there's a sadness in that. It's sad that people need that. It's sad that people aren't already okay enough with themselves that they can have humor that's uplifting rather than derogatory to somebody, an individual or a group or whatever.
yeah, and then I see the link that you're pointing to in relation to the evolution of that in some way, where maybe I, as a little boy becoming a man, got sophisticated, where I need to be to be okay. I need to display more. Like, I'm curious to the viewers out there, what ways do you display? What ways do you overextend? We also call this compensations. What ways do you rescue, fix, caretake, all these things? By the way, I put my hand up in the air, guys. I'm not a therapist who has got it perfect. So these are all ways to make us feel okay. And that's also sad on a way, Wayne, because there's a deeper truth underneath that.
There is. Two things come to mind. One is that I'll just share my own. From TA perspective, we look at what the life plans and coping strategies that people develop in their childhood and how they play out in different forms throughout adulthood. By the time I was 5 or 6, I had decided that I needed to fix the family, which is pretty hard for a 5 or 6-year-old to do. So naturally, I failed at fixing the family. So what did I do? I came out of college. I was a teacher. I taught remedial reading in high school. I became a therapist. And the last 20 years of my career, I was developing leaders. Well, one can see how all of those are an expression of that early decision to try to fix things. Now here's the second part of that. I've done a lot of good trying to fix things. So some expression of that is worth salvaging, is worth keeping. Where we can be in trouble is if we're not aware that that is driving us. And so we're not managing it, because I also, by virtue of trying to fix things, tend to get overloaded. I'll overload myself with too much pressure. I'll become too reliant on other people and too impatient and intolerant if they don't meet my expectations. All kinds of poor communication things start to slip out if I don't manage how much I'm going to take on to try to fix. And so that's what TA is great about. It doesn't say, well, you shouldn't try to fix things. It says, okay, be aware of it and manage it. Keep it within reasonable boundaries for yourself.
Yeah, I had a client yesterday talk about the struggle of not being able to say no to people.
Perfect, yeah.
And and how when you're overextended, and again, to the viewer, if we all know, if there are any Irish viewers out here, but this is not atypical to just Ireland, the selfless mothers out there who are overextending and who are constantly helping and giving, that what correlates alongside that, which is what this woman was also bringing in, was her resentment, was her anger, you
Yeah.
know, of wanting it to be returned in the same way, maybe, or angry at herself because she's saying yes, but she's really wanting to say no, but feels unable to do that, kind of stuck in that sort of place, and just how much pain, guys, what happens when we're overextended, and I know about it personally. And I know that there is ways that you can move through that and very, very successfully move through it. And Wayne's pointing to that. And I think this could be a lovely segue, Wayne, for us to go into an up and coming workshop that you're running on this subject in a way where we can communicate in a specific way. Let's invite some space and time to explore this a little bit more, Wayne. Tell our viewers about what's involved and what's the heart of this workshop.
Well, primarily it's about giving each other feedback. And let me define that as something we want to talk, something people do and we want to talk to them about their behavior. So it's a response. It's a set of responses to what other people do. Number one, what they say or what their actions are. And the reality is that people often, rather than giving someone direct, honest feedback about their behavior, people react in different ways. They begin to avoid the other person. They gossip about the other person. They end up getting mad at the other person or whatever. And there's generally an absence of good skills taught to people about how to talk to other people about their behavior. When I was at the Center for Creative Leadership, which, as many of your listeners know, is a global leadership development, training, research, publication organization that in those days was training 25,000, 28,000 people a year. They have a model for feedback, which I learned because I was working for them. I had to use their models as part of my training. And so it was mainly about impact, the impact of your behavior on others, which is really golden. But when I was working with participants who were having trouble grasping it, I would begin to ask them, well, what's the problem? And I learned that there were at least 3 other kinds of feedback that are equally important, but for different purposes. And so I wrote a book on that effect at the center. It never really caught on because it wasn't mainstream. After retiring from the center, I began thinking about, where might I go farther with it? And I began looking deeper into the impact model. And what I discovered was that basically telling a person the impact of their behavior on you is less threatening to them because it's not about them. Or it's less flattering to them if it's positive. For instance, if I give you the impact feedback right now that I'm comfortable in this conversation, well, that's about me. Now, you can do what you want about that. You might be curious. You might choose to feel good about it, but I'm not putting you on the spot. If I said, however, you're making me feel comfortable, well, that kind of makes you responsible for my feelings. And that could trigger a different reaction. Now, in the case of saying, you made me feel comfortable, you'd probably feel good about that. But if I said, you made me feel uncomfortable, now there's some part of you that might want to say, well, wait a minute, what am I doing to make you feel uncomfortable? This is my show. I've invited you on it. Why aren't you happy here, And so at the first level of impact feedback, it's helping people realize that they can start a conversation about the reaction they're having rather than get into a power struggle with the other person. So then in the last few months, I began digging deeper into it. And I realized that in order to give impact feedback, you have to disclose something about yourself. You have to reveal something about yourself, which can be scary at sometimes. But when we look at transactional analysis, transactional analysis identifies some basic kinds of time structuring when we're with other people. And one of those time structurings is intimacy, which is considered to be spontaneous, honest, interaction without any ulterior games or motives going on. It's kind of like we're bare at that point in time, totally open book, spontaneously so, nothing premeditated. And I realized that, in a conversation where two people are sharing the impact of the moment upon them, that is intimacy. Because you're sharing what's going on with you in the moment, spontaneously, and not talking about the other person. And when two people share what's going on with them in reaction to each other without any of the ulterior messages or anything like that going on, they meet each other in a space where they can have profound communication. So impact can lead to intimacy, not necessarily, depending on the circumstances, but it functions at different levels. You can use impact feedback to communicate with a person that's at work with you about something that they're doing that is great or something that's problematic. You can use it with a spouse. You can use it with a teenager. Yes, I said you can use it with a teenager. You can. It's interesting. Sometimes they get very restless with it because they don't know what to do. And you can also use it to, part of that is you can kind of figure out where a person's coming from. For instance, if the feedback that you give somebody, the impact feedback is, I'm feeling concerned. And the person's response is, well, I don't care how you feel. Well, pretty much there that you're dealing with somebody that you're not going to get anywhere with. So that you can thank them for revealing where they're coming from and figure out another approach, because they're not going to meet you as courageous people. They're going to meet you as cowards with a sword and shield, I got carried away.
No, this is good. This is good. What I'm hearing here, Wayne, is just this. You didn't put in this word, but I heard spontaneity. I heard intimacy, and I suppose I'm hearing awareness, which is the sort of trifecta that creates a sort of autonomous way of being in the world, I suppose. And what I'm hearing here is that you're talking in a sort of language and a structure that can help us become more autonomous, and then probably move towards homonomy in a way where we bring that yumminess of awareness, spontaneity, and intimacy towards the family group, the friends group, the organization, and expand out into the community in some way. And that kind of is bringing me alive when I see that sort of is possible, because if we look at the struggles in family, in society, in community, where that's broken down, where it's not responsive, it's not reliable, it's not safe somehow. There's an old script being playing out. But you're talking about, in very simple language, it feels like a wonderful remedy to cultivate, to be able to build those bridges where they might be broken. Does that resonate, Wayne?
Yes, I would say it's one tool. It's certainly not a silver bullet that solves all problems, but if we think of it in terms of when you want to talk to somebody about their behavior, either to maybe encourage them to increase it or decrease it or do something different or whatever like that, if we can do that in a way that doesn't threaten them, we're more likely to be successful. And impact feedback is less threatening than the other kinds of feedback, which I classified as authoritative. And in the workshop, I'll go into what those were. But I want to go back to something that you said that was really right on target. When you said increasing awareness, because if I'm having a reaction to something you do, and I take responsibility for, I got to figure out what the impact is on me rather than put it in terms of your behavior. In other words, if I say, you made me feel uncomfortable, I'm not taking response. I'm not aware of the fact that something inside of me is causing me to feel uncomfortable in response to X behavior. And if I don't have the courage to recognize and learn about that, I'm forever adrift in a social mix and kind of like I've made myself helpless in response to what other people do. I just have these conditioned responses. But if I'll take responsibility for being aware of what I'm doing to myself in response to any behavior, I then have empowerment. I have the ability to choose differently. And so if I share that I'm uncomfortable with you, it's maybe you'll say something that helps me feel comfortable. Maybe you'll say something that gives me some insight. Maybe you'll say, Wayne, I was feeling uncomfortable too. And suddenly in that moment, we have intimacy because we're meeting on totally neutral, equal ground.
Yeah, wow. No games there, and not in those moments. There's no ulteriors. There's no manipulation.
Right.
There's no blame. There's no power struggle. You've just
Yeah.
wow. And I love at the beginning when we talked about communication, you said, Wayne, that often it's about who's right and who's wrong. Like it's about trying to get that position, that upper sort of, I suppose, grandiosity in a way. Just yeah, I'm right. And what would happen if we could let that go and move into what you're talking about here, which is a deeper connection,
Yes.
with awareness, with that aliveness of the spontaneity as well, where something stuck heavy, like going through the Florida swamps with a pair of Wellingtons on, that's just, as opposed to being able to have that aliveness where we're exchanging, as opposed to a sense of deadening or avoidance.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm very visual at times, Wayne, so bear with me. I'm seeing it in symbols as you're talking to me. And while in your own life, as you were, suppose, like kind of adding all these parts, to this offering, to this style of thinking and behaving and relating. Have you seen that what have you saw in your own life or in the life of the people in your groups or people in who are being coached by you? What are the things that you're seeing that's being helped by this approach to communication?
Well, in the organizational life, usually this would be something that they'd write me an email about after they practiced it for a while back in the workplace, or I'd be coaching them after the workshop and they'd talk to me about it. But they would talk about two things. They would say, it's a lot more work to figure out how to do it than I thought it was going to be. And it is. It does take practice. And the other thing they would say is that something in the area of it seems like I can get people to listen to me. Well, I think that's pretty powerful. I mean, we could go on and on about variations on that, but that's pretty basic, right? Just to get somebody to listen to you.
Yeah. Wayne, so many times every week I'm hearing this. Well, they don't listen to me, and sometimes the finger again is pointed towards the other person as the problem.
Right.
And what you're saying here is, well, like, what would it be like if we took responsibility and was able to come towards them, where we left that the way that we came towards them would make us interesting on some level to the other person, or interesting is not the right word, but it's where we have the awareness of how we may make ourselves not seen or seen in a way that's not helpful, and to be able to work through that, to be able to to come towards the person on that neutral playing ground and allow yourself to be seen. That's powerful. That if we could learn how to do that.
And let me add too that, remember I told you there were 3 other kinds of feedback?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what we'll be covering in the workshop on November 19th, it also includes honoring those other kinds of feedback, that they have their time and place. So in a sense, we're talking about, you have 4 options for what kind of feedback to give. You can judge the situation. You can pick the option that works best. I worked with a lot. I'll just give an example. The other 3 are direction, contingency, and attribution. Direction is telling somebody what to do. It's do this, do that. Contingency is the if then. If you do this, then something's going to happen. And attribution is where you apply a quality to somebody or what they've done, like good job. That would be an attributional feedback. All three of those have their place. And so we will look at that. But for instance, I was working with a line supervisor in a plant where all of her employees were people who studied what's happening on gauges and prevented the thing from blowing up. And she said, well, I can't say to these people, I feel concerned that this is gauges in the red, you know. She's just, I got to tell them to turn down the pressure. A directive feedback. And I said, good for you. That's exactly what they need. Now, if you get somebody that's too sensitive to take direction in a situation like that, then you have another problem to deal with. But that kind of feedback has its time and place. They all have their time and place. And the other three are forms of feedback that people are pretty familiar with. So what we add to their skill set is intimacy, or at least impact feedback, rather, which has the potential for intimacy, so that they now have all four tools and they know when to use them.
Yeah, because if, you know, what in that example that you're talking about, Wayne, I think it's a really great example where, you know, there's a real decision needs to be made for like the safety of the processing plant. And if the woman was unable to give that type of feedback, there's a problem. And if somebody on the other end was, got in touch with their child or whatever and wanted to rebel in some way, we've got a problem. So it's so there's always these dynamics, and to learn whether you're from the supervisor's position where you're helped to be able to be directive at the time where that's important, and whether you're on the line as an operator where you're learning to be able to move into an adult position and hear it and experience it differently. I think that's so powerful. These are the ordinary everyday transactions that can really rupture the possibility of connection, and of course upset the possibility of intimacy as well. So that's and you know, and then when you go into marriages, for example, you know, you were a marriage counselor for many years as well, Wayne. I can imagine it would be very helpful in the household to learn these techniques as well.
Yes. Yeah. It's pretty common experience that any marriage counselor, any relationship counselor deals with is people are always blaming the other person. I realized early on as a marriage counselor, in the room there were 4 stories. There were each of the partners had a story. I had an interpretation, and then the truth probably was somewhere out there, you know. And so getting people to talk about what's going on within them and not make the other person responsible for it is huge. And at first people feel like they're giving up power. So it's threatening for them. It is a disclosure. You're laying down your weapons and offering yourself bare to the other person. So I also talk about how do you take care of yourself in that response. Often I'll say something like, well, if you're going to have intimacy, you're going to have to take one in the gut from time to time. So learn how to handle it. Otherwise, you won't have intimacy. If you're not willing to risk, you won't have intimacy. And it's the same thing with impact feedback, which only part of it would be part of intimacy. But even the rest of impact feedback, you're disclosing something. And sometimes people will just not be receptive.
Wow. Well, that feels very powerful. And you also mentioned about teenagers, you know, the struggle with parenting as well. And I have a parenting group. Again, I'm really hoping that they tune into your workshop so that they can get the benefit of how to there's so, and to the viewers out there, it's not easy to parent. It's a challenging position to be able to do that, and often we do it through the lens of how we were parented.
Yes. Yeah.
This is an opportunity. Definitely attending Wayne's workshop would be to maybe evolve that style of relating, or that style of parenting, to a new way, where you could, instead of having to, sometimes we got parented as in like fear-based. You do what you're told, or there's a consequence, for example. Yeah. And to be able to come in from a more heart-centered, more spontaneous, to have awareness, to have the possibility of intimacy, just feels like a better deal for everyone involved. Because, and I invite anybody here who is a parent to look back on how they've parented and to see how well it works. And if it isn't working well, then definitely I think attending Wayne's workshop could be very, very helpful for you. Because me as a parent, I'm always trying to learn new ways to get out of the way, try to, and then to bring my heart in, to get my head out of the way, and to bring my heart into the conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, so many, like anyone where we open our mouth to talk to anybody, I think would benefit from this workshop. And we got the links below. I'm gonna also put in an Eventbrite. It's on Eventbrite, everybody. So if you can't find it through the link, you can go to Eventbrite and sort of copy and paste the sort of, or just put Wayne's name in there, and it'll pop up. Wayne, when is the workshop on?
November 19th, 12 to noon to 2 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay.
And then for folks who register, the video will be available online at YouTube for about a week afterwards. So if you weren't able to attend it live, but if you subscribe to it on the site there, the Eventbrite, if you subscribe, well, then you can view it at a more convenient time for you. The only difference is I will have people doing a couple little practice exercises, because it's a workshop. It's not a lecture, at least not totally lecture. And you would miss the chance to participate in that and put in some feedback. So other than that, at least it'll be available, and they can find that information. Were you going to show something on the screen, or what? I didn't know what you had in mind.
Yeah, no, just in the link we have all your information, and the link that is there just down below, or just some of you just click on the Facebook box, you should find it.
Oh,
but I will try to get the Eventbrite and also put it in there as well, a direct link. But for anybody who's interested, pop Wayne's name into Eventbrite, and it'll pop up. And definitely.
Could I offer another option?
Yeah.
Well, if they go to the USATAA, that's the United States Transactional Analysis Association, USATAA, go to their website, and in education, click on workshops. So go to education workshops, and a page will pop up that gives all kinds of more information, which might be important for people to share with friends or something that don't have the time to watch our video. And there's a link from there to Eventbrite.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's the link that I have in the bottom here of the feed. And and I didn't know it was going to be an experiential as well. So for any Hughes like myself who are bored having to listen to sometimes chats, even though the content is good, but to be involved in it, it really fast tracks your learning. It helps you learn through the experience, which then goes deeper into your knowing, which is has me excited. I'm going to be traveling at that time, Wayne, when that workshop's on, but I'm going to get up early or late or whatever it is in the middle of the night to attend it, because I think it's, I know it's going to be very valuable to have that sort of bow in my repertoire. So come here, Wayne. I'm so happy that you took time out of your busy day to be with us here to share some wisdom to our viewers. But I just want to finish with a question for you, Wayne. What would be one thing that would be important for anyone thinking about attending this workshop? That what would it really help them? What could they take away from this workshop if they were to attend?
Well, it gets back to your original comments. It would be skill for better communication and being able to, let's say, being able to influence people with less of a chance of making them unhappy with you.
Who doesn't want that? That's the elixir of
I
youth.
expect a big crowd.
Wayne, thank you for your time and your heart, and we'll be in touch. And for the viewers, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this content, if you got impacted in any way, please hit a little like or a share or subscribe, or send it to someone who you feel that is struggling in some sort of conflict in their relationships, whether with their partners, with their children, within their businesses, within their friends. There's a way, and sometimes, not sometimes, always, we need people to help us. And this is a wonderful area where you're going to meet really, really cool people on this sort of experience. So please reach out if you're interested to Wayne, to the link that will be below. And if you have any queries or questions about anything, please hit either the Wellbeing's website, or if you're in an area and you're struggling, please reach out to a therapist or a coach if you're finding yourself stuck or in some sort of cycle where you've realized that you can't give yourself enough support right now. We need people, and it's been a real honor for me here being with you today, and we'll be right back in this hot seat in 2 weeks' time. So thank you, and Wayne, thank you again. Take care, everybody.